So it's that time where we're getting into the big pop culture stories of the week. And this week it's about figuring out whatever this behind the scenes drama is on the White Lotus, as well as talking about the latest queer rom-com and Viola Davis's Die Hard moment. The group chat's here. Let's go. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. So let's kick things off right here.
As the 20 richest nations on Earth gathered at the G20 summit, it's time we solve a crisis worse than any we've seen in decades.
President Danielle Sutton, I see you for what you are. I've got your family.
You're never gonna make it out of here alive.
That's a bit of the trailer for G20. It's the new action movie starring Viola Davis as the President of the United States. So, she's channeling her Harrison Ford Air Force One get off my plane energy in this movie, which is about a president who is facing off against hostage-taking crypto terrorists at a G20 summit in South of Africa. G20 is streaming now on Prime Video, and we have the group chat here with their takes on this and more. Jovanté Anderson, Jael, Richardson, and Siddhant, Adlakha. Thanks for being here, y'all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, Jovanté, I'm going to start with you. Let's just get right into it. What did you think of G20?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I especially enjoyed seeing Anthony Anderson and Marcy Martin in roles that were particularly more serious, right? They're known for comedy, so it was kind of fun to see them kind of expand their range. It was a typical kind of action movie in particular ways, right? So, even as I was watching for the plot, kind of in some ways I could anticipate what was coming. I do think, however, as a Black writer and critic, there are some particular concerns that I have about the film, and I'm thinking about how it seems to be part of a trend of films that kind of posit Black folks as the saviors, right, of a place like the US. And here I'm thinking about the work of someone like Professor Erica Edwards, who wrote a really important book called The Other Side of Terror, Black Women and the Culture of US Empire, in which she kind of speaks some more about this, right? And in this genre, we have Scandal, for example, right? And other series and films that kind of, Black folks come along and not just save America, but also in this case, save the world, right? And so I do wonder about how this film itself is framing itself as, and celebrating itself as a part of that genre, and perhaps, how it might have, been a little bit more critical of it.
Interesting. That's definitely something I didn't really consider. And maybe because, like Siddhant, when I'm coming into this movie, I don't know how much my brain's turned on. I don't know how much I'm looking for in terms of political intrigue. This is definitely an action movie, and as an action movie, Siddhant, how does this movie deliver?
I kind of wish it delivered a little more, because very early on in the film, you have the Queen Viola Davis practicing judo, and she doesn't seem to get to do enough of that during the film. And in almost every action scene, it's always someone else saving her. And on one hand, you have the political side of the film, which is this very liberal fantasy of a hyper-capable, almost flawless Black president who can seemingly do no wrong. But then on the other hand, it's the promise of Viola Davis kicking ass, which I think is an incredible promise. I don't necessarily think it delivers all the way, but it's a fairly competently put together film, even though I wish she threw a few more people over her shoulder.
Yeah. Well, she definitely showed us she has moves in The Woman King, so there's a, but also, to compare it to other movies, this movie, the blueprint here, Siddhant, is obviously Die Hard. And then, when I talk about Die Hard, I'm still one of those people who hold it up as possibly the greatest action movie of all time. How does a movie like G20, which is certainly, following that blueprint, compare?
I don't think it's having enough fun with its premise, because it's also not the first time we've had a presidential Die Hard. We've had White House Down, we've had Olympus Has Fallen, which fall on two very different sides of this scale. Like Olympus Has Fallen takes itself so seriously that it becomes goofy, and then White House Down is basically an action comedy with Jamie Foxx and Channing Tatum. Olympus Has Fallen is the one with Gerard Butler. But yeah, this one, I think it also could have had a little more fun with what it was doing, because I mean the premise is inherently a little silly. You know, you have basically um, you can either call it Kamala Harris or gender swapped Obama shooting people, which is it's a funny idea, but I wish I had just had more fun with it.
hmm Well, I mean, look, I mean, we're talking about Viola Davis here, and we got to mention, like, no, she's an EGOT winner, one of the very rarefied few. And for those who don't know, like, an EGOT winner means she's won the Emmy and the Grammy and the Oscar and the Tony Award. Okay, and you know, like we don't typically associate EGOT winners with this kind of a movie. We don't typically associate Viola Davis with this kind of movie because I mean, we often see her in very dramatic roles. So, Jael, what do you make of casting Viola Davis in an action role like this?
Well, I love that. I mean, Siddhant referred to her as the queen. She is. And I think it's great to see her in a role like this, doing judo, having fun. I think she can do no wrong for me, and she does no wrong in this film personally. I think all of my criticisms probably really come down to the writing and the structure of the story, I think, is where some of the things fall apart, for me.
Right.
There's a question of like, is this a political, is it an action film, or is it a political film, or is it both? I think everything is political. I think when you make something, when you make art, it's political. You choose to be apolitical, that's political. You choose to tackle politics, it's political. And I think they do this weird thing where they're doing this action film, but they're also trying to like address political issues. There's a few references that Viola Davis's character makes about being women and the pressure, and you have all this, and then she's yet super mom and superwoman and super everything. And for me, that was the part that I didn't like. I think it could have leaned heavy into Die Hard, have her kick people's butts and do all this stuff and make it fun and make it, just her being a Black woman doing those things is political and does something powerful. You don't have to like pour onto her the pressure of being a Black woman and being a mom and, have her articulate all of that. I think seeing her conquer is a visual political thing that I think they should have pulled some of the extraneous writing and the extraneous, like the heavy-handed addressing of issues out of it. I think that's a different type of film for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because I mean, you basically talked about this as being like it's actively trying to not to be political, even though that in itself is a choice. But at the same time, I mean, this is a movie. I mean, yes, it is about a president of the United States. It is about a G20 summit. It has the crypto terrorists shorting the stock market to get rich, which is feeling especially, eerily relevant at this moment. So, do you think that though, like, this is a movie where, even though it may not be trying to make some explicit political points, arriving in this moment, it leaves enough room for us to project certain politics onto it? Especially, I mean, Siddhant said, like, we could be projecting Kamala onto this character. And I feel like there's also characters we could project other figures on. I mean, what do you make of that?
I think it would be interesting to assess like the different ways this film would land had the election gone differently. I think it's really fascinating to respond to it given who's president and what's happening versus if it had gone a different way. And in that way, I think it's doing something important. I think it's asking some important questions. But I think that's a thing for critics to do. That's a thing for us to do as we watch. I think in the creation of the film itself, like lean into the fun. Give Viola Davis like that amazing die-hard experience without having her like having the text carry that. I think that's a fun thing for us to do on the other side that I wish had sort of happened. But yeah, it does definitely lend itself to that kind of like, what are we seeing here? How are we meant to feel now?
Yeah. Well, Jovanté, last word to you. I mean, what do you make of what Jael is saying there?
No, I agree. And I think that at some point I also asked the same question, right? Is this a political film? Is this supposed to be just a film where, as you said, you turn your brain off and you just watch her kick ass, right? And I do think that ultimately, even at the very end of the film, I wasn't sure. I wasn't quite sure. Not only whether it was political or action, but also what kinds of statements it was making politically. If it was making statements, which it seemed to kind of try to to be doing. And so I do think that, yes, while I did enjoy Viola, seeing Viola on screen, I am left a bit confused by what it hoped to achieve.
Right, right. Okay. So let's leave G20 aside. That movie, by the way, is streaming now on Prime Video. If you're just joining us, I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Jovanté Anderson, Jael, Richardson, and Siddhant Adlakha are all here. Okay, I want to talk about this new romantic comedy from Calgary filmmaker Roshan Sethi. It's called A Nice Indian Boy, and it sounds like this.
What's new, Naveen? Got a boyfriend?
Let me see it.
My parents are super liberal. Just don't bring up drinking or sex, and no displays of physical affection.
We think it's wonderful that you're white.
Oh my God. A big wedding party with all of the people we love. I want the same thing with you.
My only gay son is getting married?
So that's a bit of the trailer for A Nice Indian Boy, which, look, it's a bit like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, but except it's about an introvert named Naveen who struggles to introduce his family to his boyfriend Jay, who also happens to be a white guy raised by Indian parents. Siddhant, you love this movie. Okay, I mean, in your review for Mashable, you wrote, and I'm going to quote you, "Rarely has a rom-com been this simultaneously hysterical and touching." So unpack that for me. What do you mean by that?
Sure. I think the strength of a movie like this is the way it both builds on what's come before it while also doing something new. Because there's this really interesting thing running throughout the text of this movie where everyone talks about the 1995 Bollywood landmark DDLJ, or Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, which is basically the film that sort of took Bollywood worldwide. And it uses the traditions of Hindi romantic cinema to tell a story that you don't normally get to see in that format, which is about, two guys, and one of them, is white. And so culturally, it's trying to do a whole different thing while still staying rooted in the traditions of a lot of Indian romance. And that's sort of, in a way, the text of the movie as well. Characters trying to both break out of existing molds and traditions while still holding on to, their culture and the things that make them who they are. Mm-hmm. And it's about love and individuality and all these things, but it's also about family. And Rad, you can probably speak to this in that a lot of South Asian films made in Canada and the US have the same, sort of war between first gen kids who want to do their own thing and be their own individuals and leave their close-minded parents behind. But this, I think, strikes a sort of delightful balance between the two.
Yeah. I mean, I think what struck me about this movie is that it is following that same dynamic that we see in Bend It Like Beckham in terms of that generational tension. But this one had a little more generosity, I think, towards the parents and a generosity towards the parents, and also more criticism towards our generation, where we're not necessarily giving our parents a chance. Like we are as guilty as they are of not trying to see the nuances of that existence. That was my takeaway from it. Jovanté, I mean, I wanted to know, what do you take away from A Nice Indian Boy?
Yeah, I mean, I really like the description of it as hysterical because I couldn't stop laughing. I had a lot of fun watching it, and I also thought that its warmth, even to the very end, I was just like awing at every moment. I really, really enjoyed it, and I do think that the film as an avenue to think about the intersections of culture is really important. At the same time, I also wondered if there were moments where I thought that the film sometimes fell into particular tropes about immigrant cultures, as much as it also gave credit, as you all are saying. But I do wonder if it could have given a little bit more credit to immigrant cultures, because it does feel sometimes that it fell into this trope of the kind of backward, as much as they're trying, right? The parents who don't know much about sexuality and have to, kind of gain a pedagogy of sexuality through this other culture, right? That they're now a part of, and I do think that the film might have thought a little bit more about that, right? Because there is this kind of innocence, this kind of ignorance that's assigned to the parents that I think, I'm thinking of particular immigrants in my own family, right? My grandmother, for example, who will often talk about how much she doesn't know about gay sexuality or queer sexuality. And I'll call her out on it because she had gay friends in Jamaica, right? She was not, it wasn't like she came to the US for the first time and she was just learning about gay people here, right? She had gay friends living in Jamaica in the 1950s and 60s, right? And so I do think that, this well-worn trope of like the immigrant cultures who know nothing about sexuality, who come to the US, who then learn about what it means to be gay through things like Out TV and the film. I think that the film could have played with that trope, especially since, as Siddhant is saying, there were moments where you could see it leaning into thinking about what a rom-com could look like from a Bollywood perspective, right? And so I do think that it could have played with thinking about what might, seeing particular culturally indigenous forms of sexuality and representations of Indian queer sexuality have looked like if the parents were to draw on that as well. I'll leave it at that for now. But yeah,
that's really interesting. Well, Jael, what do you make of what Jovanté is saying there?
Yeah, I don't know if I fully agree because I really liked the way the parents were postured as both the kids kind of appear to think that they're closed-minded, but you also see these really great ways where they're trying to understand. They're being very open, but they're also, and I think part of it is like being aware of queer culture, I think is one part, but I think having a queer family member is a whole different thing. And I think they're really trying to figure out, how do we bridge that? How do we make it not just that we're okay with this, but that we're like right behind you, as supportive as we are with the daughter who is going through relationship issues of her own. So I really liked the way they handled that nuance. I also liked, with romance, there's particular tropes, there's expectations you have of the story. There's often, mixed marriage or mixed relationship tropes that we see. I loved, my favorite thing was that Jay, the partner, is white, but he's been raised by this South Asian family. And I love the idea that we're flipping the transracial adoption trope on its head, and that we're seeing, the South Asian family adopting this white child. I'm a Black mom, married to my partner's Black, and we have a white daughter. And so I think seeing this enacted for me was really fun because she's always talking about how when you explain like my parents are Black, people are very confused, right? They're used to a Black child saying their parents are white. We're used to, that kind of transracial adoption, but we're not used to it in this way. And I loved the way that provided a nuance. They met in a Gurdwara, but there's this white guy that shows up. I just think it was really, I thought they took things we expect to see and things we're used to seeing and pushed them in new directions. Seeing the dad watching queer TV to like understand his son more, and then watching it with both of them there. Those moments I think are some moments that are really, really funny and also help us sort of push the conversation a little bit further than I've seen it done in films before.
Yeah, I love that. I just feel like there's so many elements that just adds a great level of chaos to this.
Yes.
This is something we've seen before, but in a really gentle way. Siddhant, you were seeing. It's not just your review that's really glowing when it comes to this movie. The New York Times, Variety, they're all agreeing. What do you think this movie is adding to the rom-com canon?
To answer that, I'm actually going to build off what Jael said. There's this sort of gentle awkwardness to it about the parents, who I think are a much bigger part of this story than you see in a lot of Western rom-coms, because the Hollywood romance stories are understandably about the individuals in love, whereas as they say in this movie, when it comes to a more Indian form of romance, the families can be a much bigger part of that story, for better or worse. But I think what this adds is also the idea that, whether it's homophobia or just the idea of acceptance, it's not an on and off switch. It's a laborious but also funny process. And that becomes then a part of, this couple's lives as well. It's not just something off in the distance as much as they'd like it to be. And I think the way it integrates family and romance in this very honest way, I think is really appealing to a lot of audiences who haven't seen something like that before.
Amazing. Okay. So we're going to set Nice Indian Boy aside. I do want to just quickly shout out the girl from the Turned Down for What video, who's actually also really amazing in this movie. But so that movie, it is playing in Toronto theaters right now. It opens in Vancouver, Calgary, and Montreal next week. And I do want to get into one more topic. So there's a very public feud going on, and it's about this song. So that song is being shared around the internet this week, and in case you couldn't tell from the Lulululus, it's from the uncut theme for the White Lotus Season 3. It was posted by Cristobal Tapia de Veer. He's the Chilean-Canadian composer for the series. He posted this version of the music on his personal YouTube account after announcing that he's quitting the show. And he recently gave an interview in the New York Times where he spoke about his creative differences with Mike White, the show's creator. And here's how Mike White responded on the Howard Stern show.
I just don't think he respected me. He wants people to know that he's edgy and dark, and I don't know, I watch reality TV. I don't know what he's, but so yeah. So I realized because we never really even fought. I don't know what he's talking. He's supposed to be feuded. I don't think I ever had a fight with him, except maybe some emails. I knew he was not a team player and that he wanted to do it his way or whatever, but I was thrown that he would go to the New York Times to shit on me in the show 3 days before the finale. It was kind of a bitch move.
Siddhant, so that was Mike White there. And talk to me about what do we need to know about what happened between Mike White and Cristobal?
Sure. Even as someone who hasn't seen The White Lotus, because I'm behind a lot of modern television, although I'm familiar with Mike White's other work, it's hard to avoid when this kind of drama hits the headlines. As far as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the composer was a little ticked off that his version of this theme, of this song, or his full version wasn't what was used for the show, and it became a whole public spat in the media in a way that you don't really see that much. I can't speak to the specifics, not having seen the show, but again, like I said, when something like this makes headlines, you feel like you're part of the conversation, whether you want to be or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think there's he alluded to maybe there's other creative differences that they had on set, but this thing with the uncut theme seemed to be the sticking factor, or what stuck in the media. Jael, and as Siddhant said, we've never seen this we rarely see it play out so publicly. What do you make about, or what is standing out to you in terms of how this fight over creative differences is playing out? And we only got a minute left, so let me know. Yeah, what you think?
Well, I'll tell you quick. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's great that we only have a minute left because it doesn't really deserve much time. I think this is so nonsensical that an artist is don't change my work, and somebody else is I want to change it. And they've decided to go their separate ways, and now it's news. I don't know what we're doing here. The theme is 1 minute and 30 seconds long before every show, which is too long to begin with. So this whole thing, they're arguing about the wrong thing. I say cut the theme altogether, shrink it, do something else, but don't argue about creative differences and make it news.
Okay, amazing. So that's a great, in terms of cutting things short, that's a great way to end this. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Rad.
Jovanté Anderson is a writer and culture critic now based in New York. Jael Richardson is an author and executive director of the Festival of Literary Diversity, which will have events both virtual and in person in Brampton, Ontario at the end of this month. And Siddhant Adlakha is a freelance film critic based in New York. You can find his work at Mashable, The New York Times, The Guardian, and many other places. And that's it for Commotion today. Before we go, I do want to announce the winner of our Canada Reads giveaway. Congratulations to Tracy Davison from Inuvik, Northwest Territories. Tracy's getting a copy of A Two-Spirit Journey by Mene Shakabe with Mary Louisa Plemmer. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion.